The blackout lasted 11 seconds. That was the first anomaly logged by Vought International's automated systems at Site Keller, a research facility registered with the state of New Jersey as a pharmaceutical storage annex, which it was not. The building held 6 floors below street level. The upper 2 floors processed paperwork. The lower 4 did not process anything the company discussed in quarterly earnings calls. Sometime in the dead of the second hour past midnight, every camera on sub-level 3 flickered. Not a power failure, the backup generators stayed live. Not a software glitch, the diagnostics board showed green across all sectors. Just 11 seconds of static, like a hand pressed flat against a lens. The security team logged it as sensor drift. Someone initialed the report. Someone else filed it. Someone else filed. 12 minutes later, 3 guards on sub-level 4 had stopped responding to radio check-ins. The duty supervisor tried twice, then walked the corridor himself. He found them in a stairwell. Alive, seated against the wall, each with zip ties around their wrists. Not Vought-issue zip ties. Something thinner, darker, synthetic, in a way the supervisor couldn't name. He called it in as a medical emergency. That was the fastest way to get a response without triggering the public-facing alert system. And everyone at Site Keller understood that triggering the public-facing alert system was worse than whatever had actually happened. Not long after the duty supervisor found the access log for sub-level 6 had been wiped. Not corrupted wiped. The timestamp column showed a clean row of dashes where the last 40 minutes should have been. He called his direct superior instead of the police. His direct superior called Stan Edgar's office. Edgar's office called Stan Edgar. Edgar was awake. He was usually awake. "Tell me what's missing," he said. His assistant read from the inventory flag a secondary data drive from the Eden data cluster and a culture aliquot canister from cold storage unit 7. The primary drive was untouched. The fragment in its containment housing was untouched. Whatever had come through that building had taken the copies, the backup drive, the derived samples, and left the originals sitting exactly where they were. Edgar was quiet for 4 seconds. "Lock it down," he said. "Internal classification only. No police contact, no building management, no insurance notification. Get legal on the phone and have them draft a containment protocol before sunrise. And pull the biolog on those guards. I want to know if they saw anything before someone decides to tell them what they saw." He set the phone down. He did not go back to sleep. 2 days earlier, Site Keller's sub-level research team had submitted their weekly status report on Project Eden. The report was 11 pages. The executive summary was 4 sentences. The 4 sentences said anomalous material recovered from the Midwestern incident continues to demonstrate measurable interaction with Compound 5 at the cellular level. Reaction profiles suggest potential for enhanced neural stabilization in SUPI subjects. Recommend expanded testing phase pending ethics board sign-off. Projected timeline for first viable prototype 90 days. The ethics board sign-off was a formality. Everyone understood that. What the report did not say, because the research team had learned what got flagged and what did not, was that 2 of the 5 test cultures had destabilized completely. Not failed, destabilized. The samples had stopped behaving like biology and started behaving like something else, something that registered on the monitoring equipment in ways the team had spent 3 days trying to explain before collectively deciding the explanation could wait until after the 90-day mark. The anomalous material itself sat in cold storage unit 7. It had no official designation beyond the project name. The researchers called it the fragment because it looked like a piece of something larger, a shard of dark composite material, roughly the length of a forearm covered in geometric etching that no one had been able to map to any known manufacturing process. It had been found at the Midwestern incident site, alongside equipment that had similarly defied cataloging. The recovery team had bagged everything, and asked no questions. That was standard procedure for Vought's field collection units. Asking questions was how people got reassigned. The fragment had been in cold storage Unit 7 for 19 days when 2B found it. She had been tracking the Eden data signature for 6 of those days. Pod 042 had done the threading, a passive network sweep that snagged a fragment of encrypted logistics traffic routed through a Vought subsidiary server, then spent 4 days peeling back corporate routing layers until a physical address resolved. 3 lines of internal code, a facility ID, a cross-reference against commercial building records and satellite mapping. The pod flagged it. 2B approved the target. 6 days from first intercept to confirmed location. She came in through the building's HVAC maintenance shaft. On the east face 3rd floor, deep into the pre-dawn quiet, when the city's noise had thinned to its lowest register traffic. Sparse ventilation system cycling down the particular drone of a place holding its breath before morning. She filtered it out the same way she filtered everything irrelevant automatically, without effort, without conscious decision. Her optics adjusted to the dark of the shaft. Her movement was controlled, precise, calibrated to avoid contact with the metal walls. Pod 042 moved with her silent running passive sensor sweeps every 8 seconds. She had studied the facility layout for 4 days before entering. She knew where the cameras were, where the guard rotation ran, where the power junction sat. She knew that Sub-Level 6 required 2 separate keycard authentications and a biometric scan. She had prepared for all 3. The first 2 floors she passed through without incident. The guards she encountered on Sub-Level 4 were handled in under 40 seconds, non-lethal efficient, positioned where they would be found quickly enough to avoid any medical complication. She left them seated because standing bodies fell unpredictably. Sub-Level 6 was colder than the floors above it. The air carried the sterile edge of active refrigeration units. The Eden Archive occupied a reinforced room at the corridor's end, a server cluster, and an adjacent cold storage annex. She moved through the card reader with a cloned credential the pod had assembled from a proximity signal intercept 3 days prior, and through the biometric lock using a method that stripped her entry from the live audit trail. Vought kept a redundant mirror log on an air-gapped system 2 floors up. She didn't have access to that, and she hadn't tried. The live trail was enough. Whatever investigators pulled from the mirror would show a gap, not a ghost. The primary drive was too large to extract without detection. She pulled the secondary, the backup copy, the one that existed precisely because Vought never trusted a single point of storage. She copied what she needed from its index in 40 seconds, confirmed the data set against her mission parameters, and pocketed the drive. Cold Storage Unit 7 required manual entry. She opened it. The fragment lay on a sealed tray at the rear, the original behind 3 layers of containment casing. She did not touch it. Beside it, racked in a separate housing, sat 4 culture aliquots, the biological test samples derived from the fragment's interaction with Compound 5. These were the copies Vought kept of their own experiments. She confirmed the fragment's containment seals were intact, took the aliquot canister from the secondary rack and closed the unit. Pod 042 hovered at her shoulder. "Beacon," she said. The pod had already queued the protocol. It took 11 seconds. The same 11 seconds the cameras on Sub-Level 3 showed nothing but static. When it finished, a minimal tracking package sat embedded in the archive network's edge node, dormant, invisible to standard security sweeps designed to transmit a single-line signal. Anytime the Eden dataset was copied, moved, or backed up to a secondary location, Pod 042 logged beacon planted. Active. 2B did not acknowledge the confirmation aloud. She turned toward the exit corridor. The facility was quiet behind her by the time she reached the maintenance shaft. No alarms, no running footsteps, just the hum of refrigeration units and the distant bass of the city above, indifferent and ongoing. She was 3 blocks away when the duty supervisor found his guards in the stairwell. Stan Edgar received the full incident report before the sky had fully lightened. He read it twice. He was particularly interested in one detail: the primary drive had not been touched. The fragment in cold storage had not been touched. Whoever had entered Site Keller had taken only the redundancies, the copies, the backups, the secondary layers. They knew the architecture, he said to no one in particular. His assistant on the other end of the call offered no response. That was good. Edgar didn't need a response. He needed to think. The redundancy structure of the Eden data cluster had been designed specifically to survive a targeted breach. The assumption being that any intruder would take the primary and leave satisfied. Someone had come in knowing exactly which piece of the system to take and which to leave. That meant they hadn't come to steal Eden. They had come to understand how Eden moved. And while the city was still dark, Edgar called the head of security operations and issued 3 directives. Increase physical security at all. Eden-adjacent sites initiate a full audit of the cluster's internal access logs for the past 30 days and prepare a public communications brief, attributing the Site Keller incident to a corporate espionage attempt by an unnamed foreign competitor. The last directive was the most important. The story needed to exist before anyone else tried to tell it. Before the morning shift had fully clocked in, a junior PR's coordinator had drafted the press release, legal had revised it twice, and the communications director had it queued in his outbox, time to land in the news cycle before the morning shows hit their second commercial break. The machine moved fast when the stakes were high enough, and Vought had built the machine specifically for mornings like this one. The release said nothing about Eden. It said nothing about the fragment, the data cluster, the missing drive, or the 3 guards who had woken up in a stairwell with no memory of the preceding half hour and a dull headache that the company's medical team was attributing in writing to shift fatigue. What it said instead was that Vought International had experienced a minor security incident at a New Jersey administrative facility, that all relevant protocols had been activated out of an abundance of caution, that no proprietary assets had been compromised, and that the incident was believed to be linked to a coordinated attempt by foreign actors to disrupt American corporate infrastructure. Vought, the release concluded, maintained a robust security posture across all its operations and was cooperating fully with federal authorities. 3 cable news channels ran it within the hour. 2 of them had moved on. By mid-morning, a congresswoman's domestic dispute had broken overnight, and there was a translucent retrospective segment that a producer somewhere had apparently been sitting on for weeks, waiting for a slow news day. In Edgar's office, on the 47th floor of Vought Tower, the morning light came in flat and clean through floor-to-ceiling glass. He stood at the window with his coffee and looked at the city below. 8 million people going about their day, buying coffee, hailing cabs, streaming Vought content on their phones, wearing the 7 merchandise, trusting the framework. He thought about whoever had been in that building in the hours before dawn. They hadn't taken money. They hadn't taken weapons. They hadn't taken anything with obvious resale value or immediate tactical application. They had taken the one thing that told you how Eden was structured, and they had planted something in the network that his team hadn't found yet, but that he was certain was there. "Find out what's in the node," he said to his security chief, who had been standing quietly near the door for the last 4 minutes. "All of them. Every edge node in the archive cluster. I want a full sweep by end of day." "Yes, sir. And if we find something..." "Don't remove it," Edgar said. "Not yet." He turned back to the window. "I want to know what it's listening for." The stock dropped 2 points before the markets opened. Not because anything had leaked. Nothing had leaked. The legal team had made certain of that before dawn. but because someone on a financial forum had noticed the after-hours trading pattern on Vought shares and written a post titled, "Something's wrong at VBI and nobody's saying what." The post had 400 upvotes by the time Vought's communications director saw it. By the time she forwarded it to the PR team, it had 800. The morning meeting on the 43rd floor was not listed on anyone's calendar. It had no agenda document, no dial-in number, no catering order. 7 people sat around a glass table, legal communication security operations, the head of Eden Project Oversight, and 2 men from a consulting firm whose business cards listed no company name. Stan Edgar sat at the head and did not have coffee. "We have a gap in the narrative," the communications director said. She had the practiced tone of someone who had spent 20 years saying alarming things calmly. "The incident is public because the building staff talked. We've managed the scope, but we can't manage the absence of an explanation indefinitely." "The foreign actor framing holds," legal said. "We've used it successfully in 3 prior situations. Those situations had bodies or property damage, something for news cameras. This one has 3 guards with headaches and a missing backup drive that we legally cannot describe." Edgar let them talk for another 90 seconds. Then he said, "What do we need?" The communications director set her pen down. "We need a face, a threat with a shape. Something the public can understand as a story, not a gap." "Homelander's been asking to make a statement," security operations said. He kept his voice neutral in the specific way people did when they were flagging a problem without wanting to own it. "Homelander makes statements about things we've already closed," Edgar said. "We haven't closed this." "He won't wait much longer?" "Then manage him for another 48 hours. Edgar looked at the consulting firm representatives who had not spoken. "I want a target profile drafted by end of day. Unknown actor, foreign-linked technological capability. Enough texture to be credible, not enough detail to be checkable." He stood. "And get someone into the building contractor records. If there's a gap in the mirror log, I want to know exactly how wide it is before anyone else finds it." One of the communications staff raised a hand halfway. "The 7's morning show slot is Thursday. If Homelander doesn't have a statement by then, the host will ask anyway." "Then have a statement ready for Thursday," Edgar said. "One that doesn't mention Eden." The meeting ended without a summary document. That was also standard procedure. Homelander found out about the meeting 3 hours later, which meant someone had told him, which meant someone on the 43rd floor had decided that being useful to Homelander was better insurance than loyalty to Edgar. This was the kind of organizational rot Edgar had been managing for years. He was tired of it in the precise, contained way that he was tired of most things. Homelander appeared in Edgar's office without knocking. He was in full costume, which meant he'd come from something public-facing and hadn't bothered to change, or he'd put it on specifically for this conversation. With Homelander, the distinction mattered. "There's a threat operating on American soil," Homelander said, "and I'm hearing about it from a junior security analyst." "You're hearing about an ongoing investigation," Edgar said without looking up from his desk. "Which is not the same thing. I should be out there. I should be the one. You should be exactly where you are, which is visible, reassuring, and not involved in something we haven't finished containing." Edgar set down his pen. "If you go public before we have a narrative, you become the story, not the solution. The story. Is that what you want?" Homelander's jaw tightened. The particular muscle at the hinge of it, the one that moved when he was deciding whether the person in front of him was worth the consequences. Edgar had learned to read that muscle years ago, and had learned also not to show that he was reading it. 48 hours, Edgar said. Then you'll have something to say and someone to say it about. Homelander left without answering. The door didn't slam, he had learned that much at least, but the air in the room felt slightly different afterward. Thinner, maybe. Or just colder. Pod 042 registered the copy request late that night. A ping from the Beacon Eden data cluster's secondary node duplication event initiated. The beacon wasn't a listening device, it was a tag embedded in the data workflow itself. When Vought copied the Eden index, they copied her tag with it. The destination resolved through 2 network hops to a Vought subsidiary handling medical transport. Cold chain logistics, refrigerated vehicles. Not a full copy, a subset extraction, roughly 40% of the index, but enough to run a physical transfer. They were moving a sample. 2B was on a rooftop 4 blocks from the subsidiary's dispatch hub when the pod relayed the route. She'd been shadowing 3 likely logistics nodes since dusk. This one lit up. A refrigerated truck registered to a shell company 3 layers removed from Vought's public filings was scheduled for a 2-hour window starting deep into the night. The destination was a secondary storage annex in a different state close enough to reach before dawn, far enough to sit outside the current security perimeter. She gave it 20 minutes and moved. The dispatch hub was a squat concrete building behind a chain-link perimeter cameras mounted at the corners, 2 guards at the vehicle bay. Neither of them saw her cross the yard. The first was inside the bay, checking cargo manifests, when a pressure point and a controlled drop left him folded against a wheel arch, breathing steady out for the better part of an hour. The second was at the gate facing the street and had just enough time to register something behind him before the same outcome. The truck's cargo manifest, which she photographed before touching anything else listed. Pharmaceutical samples, batch numbers, temperature requirements, handling codes, all of it looked legitimate. All of it was she confirmed against the beacon data a physical mirror of the Eden subset that had been copied less than an hour earlier. She pulled the relay drive from the cargo unit's sealed housing, not the temperature logger, but the chain of custody sync drive that Vought's logistics protocol required on any Eden-adjacent transfer. It carried a compressed copy of the subset index time-stamped and signed. She captured the interior storage configuration and the batch labels on each canister. She did not take the canisters. Emptying the pipeline wasn't the objective. Mapping it was. She was back over the perimeter fence before the relief guard finished his loop on the far side of the building. The driver found his colleagues before sunrise. Both breathing, both unresponsive, both positioned in ways that made it look initially like a medical episode. He called the dispatcher rather than emergency services because that was what the dispatcher had told all drivers to do in the event of any incident involving the vehicle or the cargo. The dispatcher called Vought Security Operations Line. By the time a response team reached the hub, someone had already pulled the external camera footage. 3 of the 4 corner units showed clean static bracketing the relevant window. The 4th, the one mounted above the vehicle bay door, angled slightly downward, had stayed live. It had captured 11 frames before the feed cut. In those 11 frames was a shape dark moving fast, already past the threshold. No face, no detail, just the fact of something that had been there and wasn't anymore. The cargo was intact. The vehicle was intact. The guards were being assessed by a company physician who had been driven over in a Vought car and who understood without being told that his written report needed to identify a medical cause. The data module was gone. It took the response team 20 minutes to notice because the housing was still in place. Whatever had removed the unit had done it cleanly enough that the empty shell looked from a distance occupied. The response team leader called Security Operations. Security Operations called the Eden Oversight Director, who had been awake since the dispatch ping registered on his dashboard and who had spent the intervening hours deciding whether this was the same actor as Keller or a second separate problem. He decided it was the same. The approach was identical, non-lethal, deliberate, aimed at the data layer rather than the physical asset. Whoever this was, they weren't stripping Eden for parts. They were reading the blueprints. He sent a single line to Edgar's secure channel. They mapped the transport route. They know we're moving. Edgar read it over his morning coffee. He set the cup down. The foreign actor framing was still usable, but a foreign actor implied a fixed origin. A government, an infrastructure, something that could be traced and eventually negotiated with through back channels. What they actually had was a sequence of actions with no fingerprints, no demands, and no apparent interest in anything except the architecture of what they were taking apart. He called the communications director. "The deadline I gave Homelander," he said. "I need something in front of cameras before that window closes." "We still don't have a face." "Then we give them a location instead." He was quiet for a moment. One container, one shipment point. Something that looks like an oversight in our classification process, a gap someone might reasonably find if they were already looking. If our intruder is charting the network, they'll find it. And when they show up, we'll have cameras, and the 7 will be there. He let that settle before adding, "Coordinate with production on placement. I want coverage that reads as a law enforcement response, not a staged event." The communications director understood. She didn't say so directly because the call was being logged and logs were reviewed. Instead, she said she would coordinate with the production team on optimal positioning for a public safety scenario. And Edgar said good, and the call ended. He looked out at the city, already filling with morning noise, 47 floors below. Somewhere out there, someone had walked through 2 separate Vought security operations, taken precisely what served their purpose, and left every person they'd encountered alive. He found that specific detail more unsettling than the losses themselves. Things that were trying to destroy you were easier to plan around than things that simply weren't finished with you yet. The production meeting for the operation took 40 minutes and had better catering than the security briefing that followed it. A Vought media coordinator stood at the head of a folding table in a rented warehouse space 3 blocks from the target location and walked through the shot list. 2 drone units pre-positioned. A ground crew with shoulder-mounted cameras at the east and west approaches. 1 pool feed going to 6 cable partners, simultaneously framed per the agreed language as a coordinated law enforcement response to credible threat intelligence. A news anchor in a rented SUV half a mile out, ready to go live the moment the containment sequence began. The container itself, a standard refrigerated shipping unit, logged under a Vought subsidiary as a pharmaceutical cold chain transfer, had been placed at a decommissioned loading dock in the Port Newark Industrial Corridor. Not too remote, not too public. Accessible by exactly 3 vehicle routes, all of which the security contractor team dressed in tactical gear that read Federal from a distance had been positioned to cover. "Camera placement on the east approach is your best angle for the 7 arrival," the coordinator said, advancing to the next slide. The slide was titled Narrative Beats, Sequence, and Coverage. "We want Homelander's approach to read heroic. Clear sky, clean sightlines. If he comes in from above, Drone 2 catches it." A legal representative in the back of the room raised a pen. No reference to the nature of the cargo during live coverage. If an anchor goes off script, we pull the feed. Understood. And no 7 member uses the word terrorist until we've confirmed the target is in custody and the clip has cleared review. Also understood. One more thing. Legal flipped a page. 2 of our primary sponsors have brand safety clauses triggered by any coverage involving uncontained, superpowered conflict. If this goes sideways on camera, we lose the automotive sector before the segment ends. Keep it clean. The security briefing afterward lasted 12 minutes. It covered perimeter radius radio channels response protocols, If the target proved physically capable beyond standard parameters, the phrase the oversight team had agreed on to avoid saying what they actually meant. Homelander was not in the room for the briefing. He'd been given a separate packet delivered by a junior coordinator who had drawn the short straw, summarizing his role in 3 bullet points. He had sent back the packet with one of the bullet points crossed out. The crossed-out point was the one that said, "Remain at designated position until confirmation of target approach." The container had been live for 4 hours when Pod 042 flagged it, not because the beacon had pinged the container. Didn't hold Eden data. It held dry ice, 3 sealed canisters of saline solution, and a transponder running an Eden-adjacent signal frequency, which was close enough to be interesting and wrong enough to be a decoy. The pod had been running passive comparison sweeps against the beacon's known signal pattern. The frequency match was 81%. The gap in that 19% was the tell. 2B cross-referenced the location against the transport routes she'd mapped from the relay drive. The loading dock wasn't on any of them. It was adjacent to one close enough to find if you were following the right thread too far from the actual pipeline to be operationally useful. She had also noted the drone activity over the industrial corridor. 2 units holding pattern no registered flight plan in the public airspace log, and the vehicles, black SUVs, staged at 3 approach points. Engines running no visible agency markings, despite the tactical gear. She gave it another 20 minutes of observation from a cargo crane platform 200 meters out. The anchor SUV was visible from her position. So was the camera crew on the east approach, partially concealed behind a shipping container they had apparently not considered might be see-through to anyone running thermal optics. It was a reasonable trap. She'd been mapped into a pattern, and they'd placed the bait on the pattern's edge. The problem was the container's signal frequency and the drone flight paths, and the camera positions, all of which faced inward toward the loading dock, 'cause that was where they expected her to go. She went around. Soon, hey, the anchor's earpiece crackled at the 47-minute mark. Movement on the west perimeter. Stand by. She sat up straighter. The camera operator behind her adjusted focus through the SUV's tinted rear window. On the live monitor mounted to the center console, the drone feed from Unit 1 showed the loading dock still empty, the container undisturbed. 12 seconds later, 2 of the security contractor team on the west approach stopped responding to radio check-ins. The perimeter supervisor switched channels, tried twice, then sent a visual confirmation team. They found their colleagues seated on the ground beside a chain-link section, zip-tied at the wrists, alive with the specific expression of people who had not processed what had just happened to them. The zip ties were thin and dark and synthetic. The perimeter supervisor recognized them from the Site Keller incident report, which he had read 3 times as part of mandatory incident familiarization, and felt a specific kind of dread that he did not put on the radio. What he did put on the radio was, "West perimeter compromised. All units close to the dock." Homelander heard it and moved before the coordinator could reach him. He came in from above, exactly as the drone coverage was designed to capture. And he did it at speed, because speed looked good, and because he genuinely believed that speed was the solution to most problems of this type. Drone 2 caught him perfectly. The descent, the cape line, the landing impact that cracked the tarmac in a clean radius. He straightened and scanned the dock. Empty. Container undisturbed. No one moving. He turned to the east approach, where 3 members of the security contractor team were standing very still and looking at something he couldn't immediately locate. His vision shifted registers thermal, then standard, and he saw the east side camera crew half behind a steel equipment cage on a dolly now fully visible, because the cage had been rolled 6 inches to the left, just enough to expose the tripod leg and the operator's left shoulder. He heard one of the contractor team say very quietly, she came through here. He used the other register, then the one that let him see through surfaces, the concrete platform, the staging area, the access corridor running behind the dock's administrative block. A shape moving. Dark. Fast. Already at the far end of the corridor. He covered the distance in under 2 seconds. Standard operating speed. The corridor ended in a loading ramp that dropped to a lower access road, running parallel to the waterfront, and by the time he reached the ramp's edge, the access road held nothing but a faint heat signature already dissipating against the cold ground. She was gone. Had been gone probably for 15 seconds before he'd started moving. He stood at the top of the ramp and felt the specific quality of that absence. Not danger, not threat, just the fact of having arrived at a place someone had already left. It was a feeling he associated with being made irrelevant, and he did not like it in the way that he did not like most things that implied a world operating outside his ability to affect it. Behind him, Drone 2 was still running, still recording. It had captured his landing, his scan, his turn, his run down the corridor, and his current position at the top of a loading ramp, looking at nothing. He was aware of the drone. He turned back toward the dock with what he hoped was a purposeful expression. Tung, the anchor went live at the 63-minute mark, because 63 minutes was long enough that going live felt earned and short enough that no network producer would question the timing. She said credible threat-coordinated response. The 7 on-site situation contained. She did not say what had been threatened. She did not say what the outcome had been, because the coordinator's earpiece told her to characterize it as an ongoing security operation, which was technically accurate in the sense that the operation was ongoing in the way that a wound is ongoing. The ground crew's east approach footage showed 12 seconds of Homelander landing and looking around before cutting to the anchor. The Drone 2 footage, which showed the full arc of the search, including the arrival at empty ramp sequence, was pulled from the pool feed before any of the cable partners could isolate it. Someone's phone footage was not pulled because Vought did not control someone's phone. A longshoreman working the adjacent dock had recorded approximately 40 seconds of the operation from behind a stack of shipping pallets, specifically the portion of the operation in which 4 members of a tactical response team stood in a loose cluster, looking at zip-tied colleagues while Homelander ran the wrong direction down a corridor. The clip was vertical shaky, partially obscured by the pallet edge, and uploaded to a social platform within 6 minutes of capture. It had 9,000 views before the Vought legal team's takedown request was processed. By the time the request cleared, the clip had been screenshotted, re-uploaded by 40 separate accounts, and had acquired a caption that read, "The 7 when the Wi-Fi goes out, LMAO." The stock dropped another point and a half in after hours. And after hours trading. In the production debrief, the media liaison said, "We have the anchor footage. We have the landing shot. We can cut a usable package." The legal representative said, "We can cut a package that doesn't show what didn't happen." That's the same thing. I know. Edgar, on a call from Vought Tower, said nothing for a moment. Then, "What did we get from the site?" Security operations pulled up the response team's field report. The container untouched. The decoy transponder intact. The camera equipment on the east approach physically undisturbed. But the east side operator's memory card had been swapped. The replacement card was blank. The original card, containing 40 minutes of footage, including whatever the camera had captured in the relevant window, was gone. What the contractor team's body cam footage had captured, the one unit whose camera had been facing the right direction at the right moment, was 3 frames before the lens cover had been placed over it from behind at a height and angle. Inconsistent with any of the surrounding contractor team members, and with a grip precision that the team's technical analyst described in his report as mechanical. 3 frames. A shape in black moving between 2 container stacks. No face, no hesitation, already passed. Edgar looked at the frames for a long time. She came for the camera card, he said. It looks that way. She wasn't here for the container. She came to see what we'd recorded and take it. He set the report down. She's been one step ahead of us because she's been reading our documentation as we produce it. He thought about that. The beacon, the relay drive, now the camera card. Each piece told her something about how Vought moved, stored, and covered its operations. She wasn't mapping Eden anymore. She was mapping Vought. "Get me Huey Campbell's file," he said, which surprised everyone in the room, including the person he said it to. "Sir." The boys have been sniffing around Eden for 2 weeks. If someone out there is also interested in dismantling us, they'll find each other eventually. He straightened his jacket. Campbell is the accessible one. Butcher doesn't leave threads you can pull. I'd rather know when that introduction happens than find out afterward. Across the city, in a parking structure 4 levels underground, Homelander sat in the back of a Vought SUV and did not speak for 11 minutes. The PR handler beside him had learned over 3 years in this role that 11 minutes was approximately how long it took before speaking became safer than silence. At the 12-minute mark, Homelander said, "I want to know who she is. We're working on... I don't want to report." He turned and looked at the handler with the kind of attention that made people wish they were somewhere geographically distant. "I want to know who she is before anyone else does. Before legal. Before Edgar." A pause. "Bring me something real." The handler nodded and made a note and did not write down what the note actually meant, because some things were better kept in a format that couldn't be subpoenaed. 2 levels above them, in the ambient noise of a city that had already moved on to the next thing, Pod 042 logged a secondary network signature of Vought Nasambumad internal relay briefly active during the operations communication window routing through a node the beacon hadn't previously tagged. The beacon tracked Eden's data workflow. This was something different. Vaught's operational comms infrastructure only visible when they ran a staged response at scale. It logged the coordinates. 2B filed it under active mapping and kept moving. The tip came through a contact Frenchie had burned twice before, and trusted anyway, because that was the kind of operational hygiene the boys ran on. A warehouse unit in Greenpoint registered to a shell entity that had been dormant for 11 months. No utilities active in the past quarter except a single circuit breaker that had been switched on 6 days ago. Just enough to run lights and a space heater. No one had claimed the unit. No lease renewal. The property management company, when Frenchie's contact pressed them on it, said the rent had been paid 18 months in advance in a wire transfer, originating from a routing number that didn't resolve cleanly. Butcher read the report in the van and said nothing for 30 seconds. Then he said, "She's not hiding, she's camped." Huey looked up from the passenger seat. "That's different. Someone hiding doesn't pay 18 months up front." They took 3 vehicles, Butcher, Huey, and Starlight in the lead van. Frenchie and Kimiko 2 blocks behind. 1 exit route, confirmed 2 alternates mapped. Standard approach for something that wasn't standard at all, which was most of what they did. The warehouse unit was on the ground floor of a converted industrial building, the kind that had been generating planning permission disputes since a real estate developer had bought the block in 2019 and done nothing with it. The building had 12 units. 11 showed the quiet of disuse. The 12th had a light under the door. Butcher knocked. Nobody answered. He tried the handle. The door opened. Inside a folding table, a single work light clamped to a pipe overhead, and 2B standing against the far wall with her arms at her sides, watching them come in. She had chosen the warehouse because anything Eden adjacent drew them eventually. She'd been there 3 hours before they'd known they were coming. Butcher looked at her for a moment. Then he pulled out a chair from the folding table, turned it around, and sat with his arms over the back. "You've been making a mess of Vaught's week," he said. "Appreciate that." 2B said nothing. "We've been doing the same longer. Seems like we've got a common interest." "No." Butcher tilted his head. "No what?" "Common interest. No." He glanced at Huey, who made a small gesture that meant, "Let me try," which Butcher ignored for a beat longer than was polite before exhaling and leaning back. Huey stepped forward. He kept his distance not because anyone had told him to, but because something about the way she stood made the distance feel like information. She wasn't tense. She wasn't scanning. She was just still in the way that things were still when they had already decided what they would do if circumstances changed. "I'm Huey," he said. "I know you probably don't care, but Campbell." She said it without moving. "Huey, 26. Civilian recruitment 18 months prior. No prior field experience at intake." Huey processed that. "You have a file on us." "Vought does." Pod 042 pulled it from their own mirrors. I read it. Starlight near the door made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "She read Vaught's files on us." "Standard assessment, 2B said. Know your environment." Butcher spread his hands on the chair back. "Right. So you know who we are, you've read what Vought thinks of us, and you came here anyway. Which means you need something, or you think we know something useful." He paused. "Which is it?" "The Eden Transport Network." She looked at him evenly. "You've been tracking it from the demand side. I've been mapping the supply chain. Your data fills gaps." "There it is." Butcher smiled, and it was the kind of smile that didn't reach anything above the jaw. "Information swap. I can work with that. Here's what I want in return when you find whatever you're looking for inside. Vought, you take it apart loud enough that the whole structure comes down. Soups included." Silence. "That's not my mission," 2B said. "Make it your mission." "No." Butcher stood up. He was taller than the room needed him to be, and he used it consciously. "Vaught's been killing people for 30 years with that program. People like..." He stopped. "Recalibrated? People. Just people. And you're gonna walk in, fix your little problem, and walk out while the whole machine keeps running." 2B looked at him. She waited the length of 3 seconds longer than most people waited and said, "I don't choose sides. I complete the task. Don't get in the way." "That's it, that's your whole..." "Yes." The word was flat and final and took up exactly the space it needed. Butcher stared at her. She stared back with the steady register of someone who had already moved past this point in the conversation and was waiting for him to catch up. Huey said quietly, "What's the objective exactly?" 2B shifted her attention to him. Something in the texture of that shift was different, not warmer, but more considered the way you adjusted focus on something worth observing. "Contain Eden. Prevent replication. Recover or destroy origin material. And after that, mission complete. And everything else, Vought the Soups program, the people they've..." "Not my mission." Huey nodded slowly. He wasn't happy with it. He looked like someone who had asked a reasonable question and gotten a reasonable answer that was also somehow worse than what he'd feared. "Okay," he said. "Okay. But the gaps in the transport data, we have names. Shell companies, routing numbers, a contact list Frenchie pulled from a Vought contractor 6 weeks ago." 2B was quiet for a moment. "Send it. In exchange for..." "The node location I tagged during their Port Newark operation. It's their operational comms relay, not Eden specifically, but you'll find 3 Eden-adjacent contacts routing through it. She paused. Sufficient. Starlight looked at Butcher. Butcher looked at the ceiling for a moment, jaw working, and then looked back at 2B. Fine. But when you hit the next target, we want 24 hours notice. No. 12. No. Then what? You'll know when Vought responds. She turned slightly toward the door, which was not an invitation and not a dismissal, but something in between. That's sufficient. Butcher's jaw tightened. He had the expression of someone who had tried to buy a dog and been told the dog wasn't for sale, the dog didn't want an owner, and the dog was also somehow larger than he'd been led to believe. He pointed at her. You need us more than you're letting on, whatever you're going in to finish. You don't know this city, you don't know these people, and when Vought gets desperate, they get creative. We've seen it. You haven't. 2B turned back. She held the silence a beat longer than necessary. Noted, she said. That was all. Butcher waited for more and didn't get it. On the drive back, nobody talked for the first 5 minutes. The city moved past the van windows in its usual state of comprehensive indifference. Starlight spoke first. She's not going to work with us. She'll use us. Butcher kept his eyes on the road. That's different. Is it? Huey had his elbows on his knees and was looking at the floor. She means it, he said. The objective thing. She's not doing a bit. She actually just, that's what it is for her. Go in, finish the thing, leave. Good for her, Butcher said. Doesn't help us. It kind of does, though. If she takes down Eden's infrastructure, that's her taking down Eden, not us, not accountable to anyone. No record, no exposure, no story we can use. Butcher turned in his seat, one arm hooked over the headrest. Vought needs to be seen failing. That's how you kill something like that. Not quietly. Starlight said, Huey's right that it helps. You're right that it doesn't help enough. Thank you, Annie, for that very balanced take. Anytime. Huey's phone buzzed. An airdropped message from an unknown device received his phone informed him 43 seconds ago, which meant she'd sent it before she'd known he would look at it that soon. The message contained a location string and a single line node active through 0400. After that, it migrates. He held the phone out. Butcher read it. His expression didn't change. But something behind it shifted the register of a man recalibrating how much he'd underestimated something. She already gave us the node, Huey said. She gave us a clock, Butcher said. There's a difference. He took out his own phone and called Frenchie, and the van accelerated, and nobody said anything else about 2B for the rest of the drive, because there wasn't anything else to say that the silence wasn't already saying. 3 floors below street level in Vought Tower, a junior intelligence analyst flagged a movement report for the Eden Oversight Director. 4 separate transfer events logged in the past 72 hours, all routing through secondary nodes, all moving faster than the previous cadence. Not an emergency. Not yet. But the rate had doubled since the Port Newark incident, which the Oversight Director read as a company responding to threat by accelerating output, rather than pausing to assess a pattern he had seen before in other contexts, and which had never ended well for anyone involved. He sent the report upward with a single notation: velocity increasing. Recommend strategic review. The notation reached Edgar's desk the following morning, sandwiched between a legal brief and a sponsor reassurance memo. He read it, set it aside, and did not immediately call anyone, because sometimes the correct response to escalation was to let the escalation run and see where it went. In the Greenpoint warehouse, which 2B had already vacated by the time the Vought surveillance team arrived to sweep it 40 minutes after the boys left Pod 04, 2, processed 3 new beacon pings. 3 separate duplication events, 3 new node signatures, all logged within a 4-hour window. The rate was climbing. 2B looked at the data. "They accelerated," she said. Pod 042 confirmed affirmative. 7 active transfer points up from 4. Estimated time to full network distribution at current velocity 6 days. 6 days changed the math on everything. She filed the node data, updated the target priority list, and began moving. The consent form was 4 pages. Page 1 explained the nature of the study, a voluntary enhancement trial, evaluating neurological stabilization, compounds in combination with existing biological augmentation frameworks. Page 2 covered compensation, $12,000 paid in installments with a completion bonus contingent on protocol adherence. Page 3 was liability waiver indemnification and a non-disclosure clause that ran to 11 subsections. Page 4 was the signature line and a checkbox confirming the participant had read and understood the preceding 3 pages. Most participants spent between 40 and 90 seconds on all 4 pages combined. The study coordinator at Vought's Trenton research wing had processed 41 enrollment packets in the past 3 weeks. She had a quota of 60 by end of quarter. The building director had sent her a reminder about the quota twice. The second reminder had included the phrase Q4 earnings implications in the subject line, which she understood to mean that the study was tied to something larger than she was cleared to know about and that the quota was not negotiable. She stamped the 40-second packet and moved on. 3 floors below the enrollment office in a climate-controlled wing that didn't appear on the building's publicly filed floor plans. Subject 37 sat in a monitoring chair and waited. He had been a participant for 11 days. The first 4 had been baseline testing cognitive assessments, reflex trials, standard blood work. The following 4 had involved a compound introduced intravenously in escalating doses. Each session separated by a mandatory rest period that the medical team logged as observation window. The most recent 3 days had been different. He was faster. He knew that. The reflex assessments showed it. What the assessments didn't show, because the monitoring equipment wasn't calibrated for it, was that he had stopped caring about the outcome of the assessments sometime around day 9. He completed them because the completion felt like the correct thing to do. Not because he wanted the bonus, not because anyone had told him to, but because there was a task in front of him, and tasks were for completing. The research lead watching the day 11 readings noted this in the session log as motivational profile shift subject demonstrates elevated task compliance, reduced affect variability. She flagged it as a positive indicator. The compound was designed to produce exactly this, a subject who followed through. The ethics board had signed off on the trial parameters 3 months ago. The board met quarterly. At 11:47, subject 37 stood up. No one had told him to. The session wasn't over. The monitoring tech looked up from her console and said, "Sir, we need you to stay seated." And subject 37 looked at her with the expression of someone calculating whether the obstacle in front of him was relevant to the task. He decided it wasn't. What happened in the following 4 minutes was logged by the facility as a containment incident, a term the legal team had approved for exactly this category of event. The security team was inside the wing in 90 seconds. They had the wing cleared in 3.5 minutes. No fatalities. 2 serious injuries, both security personnel recorded as occupational incidents under high-risk protocol in the HR system, which routed them to a separate workers' compensation structure that precluded external medical reporting. Subject 37 was sedated at the 4-minute mark. He was moved to a secured room on the same floor. His consent form, the one he'd spent 40 seconds reading 11 days ago, had a clause on page 3 covering exactly this scenario. Subsection 7. The director called the Eden Oversight Director at noon. We had an incident. How contained, fully, no external exposure. A pause. Viable result. He looked at the readouts from the morning session, which had been captured in full before the incident began. Subject 37's reflex profile at day 11 was operating at a level that exceeded the trial's target parameters by a factor of 2.3. Above threshold, he said. Another pause longer. Continue. Quietly. Tipped. The Eden Oversight Director sent a one-line update to Edgar's secure channel before lunch trial. Viable. Proceeding to Phase 2 intake. Edgar read it. He had a sponsor reassurance call at 2 o'clock and a legal deposition prep at 4. He noted the update in the margin of his desk calendar, not in any system, just pen on paper, and moved to the next item. By the time Butcher's contact inside the Trenton facility sent through a partial floor plan and a shift schedule, it was already evening. The contact was a former security contractor who had left Vought's employ 6 months prior and had been sitting on the floor plan for 3 of those months waiting for a buyer willing to pay what it was worth. Butcher paid slightly less than it was worth because that was also the kind of operational hygiene the boys ran on. They went through the information in the back of the safe house. Frenchie identified the ventilation access points. Kimiko looked at the floor plan's lower levels and held up 3 fingers, which meant either 3 guards or 3 locked doors, and either way, amounted to the same problem. Starlight cross-referenced the shift schedule against the facility's publicly listed utility contracts and found a maintenance window that ran from 2 to 5 in the morning. Butcher looked at the floor plan for a long time. There are people in that building, he said, and didn't mean the research staff. Huey looked up. You want to pull them out? I want to burn the whole thing down. That's not the same as pulling them out. Butcher set the floor plan down. No, it's not. The argument that followed lasted 20 minutes and covered ground they had covered before Butcher's version of winning versus Huey and Starlight's version of not losing, and ended, as these arguments usually ended, with Butcher saying, "Fine, we do it your way," in a tone that meant they would do it his way. When the moment came, and the moment would eventually come, and everyone in the room knew it. What none of them knew was that 2B had been inside the facility for 40 minutes.
Chatham.
She had accessed the research wing through the loading dock maintenance corridor, confirmed via pod optics that the internal layout matched the floor plan data she'd pulled from the beacon's logistics chain 2 days earlier. The lower levels held what the beacon data had suggested. A physical lab, a server cluster for local Eden data management, and a cold storage unit running a separate power circuit from the main building, which meant it was on a backup system, which meant it was considered critical infrastructure. She moved through the first security layer without contact. The second layer had 2 guards in a corridor junction. She took the junction from above via the utility conduit running overhead and came down behind them in a sequence that left both seated against the wall with their radios face down before either had completed a full breath. The local server cluster was her primary target. She imaged it, pulled the chain of custody sync drive from its housing, and began the process of wiping the local Eden index, not the whole system because a full wipe would trigger an immediate alert, but enough of the replication workflow to force Vought to rebuild the local node from scratch. That rebuild would take time. Time was the point. She was in the cold storage unit documenting the sample inventory when Subject 37 walked through the containment room door. He had been sedated for 4 hours. The sedative dosage had been calculated for a standard body weight and metabolic rate. His metabolic rate as of day 11 was no longer standard. He stood in the doorway and looked at her. She looked at him. Pod 042 ran a rapid threat assessment and logged subject mobile enhanced parameters, nonverbal task-oriented. She already knew. The way he was standing told her everything she needed to know about what the compound had done to him. That blankness, the quality of someone who had reduced the room to a set of variables and was currently determining which ones were relevant. She recognized the architecture of it. She had something similar, and she knew what it felt like from the inside, and she did not find it comforting to see it expressed in a face that had not been built for it. "Stand down," she said. He moved. What followed was 11 seconds. She didn't use the pod program. No need wrong environment, too much structural risk from the R030 in a confined space. She used the geometry of the room instead. The angle of his approach, the width of the doorway, the position of the storage rack to her left. He was fast, faster than the guards upstairs, still readable. She let him close to 3/4 of the distance, stepped left inside his line, and applied pressure at 2 points in the sequence that the medical team upstairs would have logged as blunt trauma upper body, if anyone had been in a position to observe it. He went down. He was breathing. He would have a difficult morning. She documented the last 4 sample canisters, completed the cold storage inventory, and left the room. She secured the containment door behind her. Pod 042 logged the encounter. 2B flagged Subject 37's file coordinates in her mapping data under a separate notation. Human subject enhanced non-hostile intent contained. It wasn't mission relevant. She logged it anyway. She was out of the building prior to the automated alert system registering the breach. Hunt. The alert reached the director at 2:40 in the morning. He called security, not Edgar. Eden adjacent incidents stayed inside the chain. Security found Subject 37 on the floor of the secured room. The cold storage unit's inventory disturbed and the local server cluster missing its sync drive. The 2 guards from the corridor junction were located 11 minutes later, seated and zip-tied with no memory of the preceding period that they were willing to put in a statement. The Eden Oversight Director told him to file it as a secondary incident, get the guards' NDA supplements signed while they were still disoriented, and have the server cluster's chain of custody drive replaced ahead of the morning shift. "And the subject?" he asked. "Proceed. If he's still above threshold in the morning, we move him to Phase 2 intake. The incident doesn't change the numbers." He pulled up Subject 37's Day 11 readouts on one screen and the cold storage footage timestamp on another, the 2-minute window between the breach and the door being secured again from the outside. Someone had locked the door behind them. He filed the incident report. He used the approved language. Homelander saw the after-action summary at 8 in the morning because someone in security operations had decided that keeping Homelander informed was safer than the alternative. The summary mentioned an enhanced subject, a facility breach, and a recovered operative signature consistent with prior incidents. It did not mention Eden by name. It described the facility as a neurological research annex. It was 4 paragraphs long and written in the specific passive voice that meant everyone involved was hoping no one would ask a follow-up question. Homelander read it twice. He had been sitting on the footage from Port Newark for 6 days. 3 frames and a shape in black, and here was the same shape in a different building, moving the same way through a Vought facility like it was a corridor in her own building. He called the PR handler who had sat beside him in the parking structure, the one who'd taken the subpoena-proof note. "The research wing in Trenton," he said. "Get me access." "Sir, the facility isn't on your—" I didn't ask if it was on my schedule. He was very calm. That was historically when he was most dangerous to be near. "Get me access. Today." The handler got him access. The location had been selected by the PR team, not the security team. That distinction mattered. A decommissioned cold storage terminal on the western edge of the Port Newark complex. Different section from the earlier incident, far enough removed to avoid visual association, close enough that the same drone operators could be redeployed. The terminal had 3 things the PR team needed: A photogenic exterior sightlines clear enough for ground-level cameras on 2 approach vectors and a sight-blocking wall on the north face that would put Homelander in dramatic relief against the city's skyline when he came in from above. The handler had walked him through the staging on a tablet, rotating the 3D overview with 2 fingers. Landing zone here, drone coverage from northeast and southwest anchor positioned on the access road. If she follows the same pattern, and the intelligence team believes she will, based on the node signature from Trenton, you intercept her at the terminal entrance. Homelander had looked at the 3D overview for a moment. Then he'd pointed at a position 20 meters east of the designated landing zone. I come in from there. That's outside the primary camera coverage. It's a better angle? He handed the tablet back. Change the drone position. The handler had changed the drone position. The script ran to half a page. Homelander had read it once, set it face down on the table, and not picked it up again. The key lines were there anyway, American Safety Vought's commitment threat neutralized, and he could produce them in his sleep. What the script didn't have was what he actually wanted, which was a line for the moment after. The moment when whoever had been walking through Vought's buildings for 2 weeks was standing in front of him on camera with nowhere to go. Legal had a note attached to the script. It said no mention of Eden or related programs, no physical engagement unless target initiates no casualties in camera coverage zone. The last clause had been underlined twice. Homelander had noted the underlining. He had not responded to it. Pod 042 flagged the terminal at 11:42. The node signature was different from the decoy at the first port Newark staging this one. Ran clean, no frequency gap. A direct match to the relay pattern the pod had been tracking since the Port Newark operations comms window. The terminal's sub-basement held a distribution relay for Vought's primary chain of custody network, not Eden-specific, but the spine through which Eden's logistics data flowed alongside 20 other programs. Pull the relay's master index, and you had a map of everything Vought moved, stored, and covered. She gave it 40 minutes of passive observation. The drone pattern was different from the previous operation. The coverage arc had been rotated, which meant they'd adjusted based on her last known entry method. The adjustment was competent. It left a gap on the north face behind the sight-blocking wall, which was either an oversight or a funnel. She mapped both options and chose the wall anyway, because the wall was also the fastest route to the sub-basement access point, and the gap's risk profile was lower than the alternatives. She went in through the wall's utility conduit at 12:19. The building's interior was a grid of decommissioned refrigeration units, tall, dark, close together, the kind of space that swallowed sound and made thermal optics unreliable beyond 8 meters. 2 security contractors in the first corridor, positioned facing the main entrance. She came from the perpendicular access, took the near angle, and left them seated between 2 refrigeration units where the aerial feed didn't reach. The sub-basement stairwell was behind a locked equipment door. Pod 042 handled the lock in 6 seconds. The relay infrastructure was exactly where the beacon's logistics data had placed it. A server rack and a physical patch panel running the chain of custody index. She pulled the master relay drive and began imaging the distribution spine, every node, every routing address, every chain of custody signature that had passed through the system in the past 90 days. Pod 042 logged the progress at 40% when Homelander came through the ceiling. Not the floor, not the door, the ceiling. Because he'd heard her through 3 layers of building and had calculated correctly that the stairwell approach was too slow. The structural damage was limited to a 2-meter section of concrete and rebar. He landed in a crouch between her and the only exit, which was the stairwell behind him, and straightened into the practiced posture he used when cameras were running somewhere above. There were cameras running somewhere above. He knew exactly where. He looked at her. She looked at the drive. 61%. "You've been busy," he said. The tone was the one from the script's controlled authoritative, the register of someone who had been told they sounded good in that register and had believed it. "You've been in 3 of our buildings in 2 weeks. I think it's time we talked about that." She didn't respond. The drive was at 70% and climbing. He stepped forward. "I'm talking to you." "I heard you." She didn't look up. 78%. He stopped. The number pulled him sideways for a moment, which was the point. "What?" "Download progress." She said it without inflection. 83. The confusion curdled into something else. He had come here for a particular shape of confrontation, the part where the other person recognized the situation and responded accordingly with fear or defiance, either of which he could use. She was doing neither. She was watching a progress bar. He covered the remaining distance in under a second. Fast enough that a standard human response time would have left her flat against the server rack before she'd processed the movement. She stepped left and down simultaneously, using the server rack's corner as a pivot, and he hit the rack instead of her. Not a miss exactly, more a redirect the kind that only worked if you knew the strike was coming and had already chosen where the energy was going to go. The rack took the impact. Several drives did not survive it. Pod 042 noted the structural integrity of the relay hardware with clinical detachment. 91%. He turned. She was already moving, not toward the exit, toward the patch panel on the far wall, the physical component the drive alone couldn't fully capture. He was faster over distance, and he knew it, and he crossed the room in a line timed to cut her off. The lights went out, not a blackout. A targeted cut the building's emergency lighting circuit, which Pod 042 had been holding as a contingency since entry. 11 seconds of darkness. Thermal optics on the drone above registered nothing useful through 3 floors of concrete. When the emergency lighting kicked in, she was at the patch panel. She had pulled the physical index card from the chain of custody housing, a small thing laminated unremarkable, and was already at the stairwell door, 97%. He moved to intercept the stairwell. She went through the wall instead, not dramatically, not at speed, but through a section of partition board between 2 refrigeration units that the floor plan showed as solid. And that was in practice a maintenance access panel, rated for foot traffic. Pod 042 had noted it on entry. She was in the maintenance corridor before he reached the partition. He put his hand through it. A half-second later felt the air of an empty corridor and stood there with his fist through a wall, while the drone feed above showed exactly that. Download complete. Primary distribution spine mapped. She was out of the structure through the north face utility conduit, the same one she had entered through, before the security team on the upper floor finished processing the emergency lighting alert. She moved at a pace, measured to pass, unremarkable, not running. Not slow, consistent with a maintenance worker on a schedule. The aerial unit above couldn't resolve her through the conduit. The cameras on the north face perimeter were facing inward. 3 blocks out, she stopped in a service alcove and let Pod 042 complete the relay drive's transfer log. The physical index card from the patch panel went into a secondary compartment. Together they constituted a complete map of Vaught's distribution spine. Every Eden-adjacent node, every chain of custody pathway, every backup relay in the network. Pod 042 logged primary distribution spine identified. Full network topology available. 7 active Eden nodes mapped. She looked at the topology. 7 nodes. 6 days of acceleration. The math hadn't changed since she'd last run it. It had gotten worse. The drone footage from the terminal showed Homelander's entrance through the ceiling. His confrontation with an unresolved figure in the sub-basement, a period of emergency lighting darkness, and Homelander's fist through a partition wall. The sequence ran to 40 seconds. The PR handler reviewed it in the vehicle on the way back to Vought Tower and did not immediately speak. Homelander, in the seat beside her, was looking out the window at the city. He had the quality of someone running a very controlled internal process that would eventually produce an external result. And the external result would not be good for the people in the immediate vicinity. "We can cut it at the entrance," the handler said. "The ceiling entry looks clean. We lead with that and cut before." "Don't." She stopped. "Don't cut it. Don't release any of it." He was still looking out the window. "I don't want footage. I want her." The handler made a note. She worded it carefully. The note said, "H.L. L requests operational priority over media strategy recurrent incident. Recommend Edgar consultation." What it meant was Homelander had stopped caring about the cameras, which was more alarming than anything else that had happened in the past 2 weeks. She sent it to Edgar's secure line. Edgar read it in his office, with the city laid out 47 floors below in its indifferent sprawl. The topology report from his security team sat beside the message. 7 active Eden nodes, distribution spine compromised, chain of custody index physically extracted. She had the map now, all of it. He called the Eden Oversight Director. "How quickly can we move the backup site to active status?" 72 hours minimum. The infrastructure needs 48. A pause. "We'll need more personnel. Use what you have." Edgar set the phone down and stood at the window for a moment. She had the map, which meant she knew about the backup site, which meant 48 hours was probably generous. He crossed back to the desk and dialed a number that wasn't in his contact list, kept in his desk calendar, written in pen on paper, next to the notation from 3 days ago. The call connected on the second ring. "The backup site," Edgar said. "Move everything tonight." The distribution hub in Bayonne had a name on its public filing. Consolidated Cold Supply Partners, LLC. Registered in Delaware, operating out of a warehouse complex that processed pharmaceutical cold chain logistics for 17 different clients. 14 of those clients were real. 3 were Vought shell entities, and through those 3 flowed the entire physical infrastructure of Project Eden. The serum batches, the chain of custody records, the inventory authority keys that told the system which samples were legitimate, which had been tested, and which were cleared for the next distribution tier. You could not replicate Eden without the inventory authority. The authority was what made a canister, and not a liability. It was also as of 36 hours ago, when 2B had extracted the spine topology from the Port Newark relay, the most precisely located piece of Vought infrastructure she had ever mapped. She ran the strike list while Pod 042 confirmed the building's internal network status. 3 targets, 1 sequence. The order mattered authority key first, because without it, the sync relay became incoherent. Sync relay second, because without it, the stock records couldn't confirm anything. Mirrors third, because a system that couldn't trust its own data, couldn't ship, couldn't test, couldn't build. You can't sell a god if you can't ship the serum. Pod 042 flagged the east loading dock as the lowest guard density entry point. She moved at 11. Inside the warehouse ran 3 shifts and never fully stopped. Forklifts on the main floor, refrigerated units along the north wall, a mezzanine office level, where the inventory management system hummed through the night on 4 workstations nobody was currently using. The guards on the floor were private contractors, people who knew they were protecting pharmaceutical cold chain logistics and had not been told anything more specific than that. She went up, not across. The mezzanine gave her direct access to the inventory terminals without crossing the main floor. 2 guards on the stairwell. She took the near one, using the stairwell's angle and the noise of the forklifts below. And the second didn't have time to register the first before the same result. She left them on the landing with their radios face down. The inventory management terminals ran a proprietary Vought system behind a standard commercial interface. Pod 042 had the credentials set from the spine topology extract. She was in the authority key registry in 40 seconds, not to steal the keys, but to corrupt the validation chain. A corrupted chain meant every canister currently in transit would fail authentication at its next checkpoint. The system would flag them as unverified. Unverified samples couldn't be processed or distributed, and a sample that couldn't be verified couldn't advance through the pipeline. Full stop. She ran the corruption protocol. It would propagate silently through the next 6 hours of automated sync cycles. By morning, the Eden pipeline would be arguing with itself about whether anything in it was real. The sync relay was in the sub-basement, a physical hardware unit behind a server room door. Pod 042 handled the lock. She pulled the relay's timing module, not the whole unit, just the component that governed synchronization cadence, and replaced it with one running a 17-minute offset. 17 minutes was enough to desynchronize the inventory mirrors from the authority key registry. The mirrors would be updating against data the registry had already overwritten. The two halves of the system would never agree on the current state of anything. She was back on the main floor and moving toward the east dock when Homelander came through the roof. He took the skylight over the main loading area faster than the ceiling entry, louder, and it sent a cascade of safety glass across 2 forklifts and a pallet of dry ice. The contractors on the floor scattered. She was already at the dock door. "Stop!" His voice carried across the warehouse without effort, shaped for exactly this kind of acoustics. "I know what you took. I know what you're doing. And I'm telling you to stop." She pushed the door open. He crossed the warehouse floor in under a second and hit the door frame at the moment she cleared it a half step behind instead of in front, which was the margin she'd been accounting for since she'd heard him enter. The dock outside was a raised platform above a vehicle bay 8 feet below. She went off the platform edge, immediately dropped to the bay, and moved under the dock structure before he'd processed that she wasn't still at eye level. He looked down. She was already at the far end of the vehicle bay, moving through the gap between 2 refrigerated trucks toward the service road. He went after her. Open air his advantage, and the service road was open. But the gap between the trucks was 3 feet wide and ran 40 meters, and by the time he cleared the dock platform, she was at the service road end and gone into the drainage corridor along the complex's southern edge. A concrete channel gravels standing water and a storm drain cover that had been lifted and set back from below. He stood at the service road. He used every register his vision had. He found the drain cover. He could follow her into the municipal drainage system. He could also collapse several blocks of infrastructure and give Vaught's PR team something that no spin cycle could absorb. He stood at the service road for 4 seconds and chose not to, and hated that it was a choice. He turned back toward the warehouse because the warehouse was still lit and there were cameras somewhere, and he needed to look like he was doing something. "Sarah." Butcher got the alert from his contact at the Bayonne Fire Marshal's office and was moving 12 minutes later. By the time they reached the complex perimeter, Vaught's response team was already running tape around the loading dock entrance, and a PR handler was on her phone pacing, clearly not getting the answers she needed. "They've gone dark," Frenchie said, watching through binoculars from the service road's far side. No statement cameras at the dock, already bagged. "She hit something significant," Starlight said. "She hit their whole supply chain." Huey had the spine topology on his phone 2B, had pushed it through an airdrop 2 hours earlier, without context the way she sent everything. He'd spent the 2 hours building a rough picture. Eden's pipeline ran through this building. The pipeline was now broken at its center. Butcher looked at the warehouse, then at Frenchie. "What's still operational in there?" "Automated systems. The refrigeration units run on independent power. Whatever samples are physically inside are still cold. Then we go in and finish it. There are people in that building, Starlight said. Contractors, night shift workers who have no idea. There are also Eden batches sitting in refrigeration that Vought will relocate by morning if we don't act. Billy? Huey's voice went flat in the way it did when he'd landed on something and wasn't moving. We are not going into a warehouse full of people who don't know what they're carrying. We don't have to burn anything. We go and pull the samples. With what we don't have the authority keys. We can't tell which canisters are Eden and which are legitimate pharmaceutical product. If we take the wrong ones, we've stolen medication from a cold chain facility, and Vought gets to play victim. Butcher looked at him. Huey looked back. Starlight said, "He's right. Without the authority data, we can't distinguish anything. And 2B just corrupted the authority data, which means nobody can sort it right now, including Vought." Nobody said anything for a moment. On the other side of the perimeter tape, a Vought contractor was photographing the bagged dock camera from 3 different angles. Then this is exactly the window. The window for what grabbing unidentifiable canisters in a building with workers, contractors, and Homelander still possibly on site. She shook her head. This is not a window. This is the moment where we don't make it worse than it already is. Butcher went quiet. He had the look of someone being talked out of the right answer by a correct argument, a particular dead end, that had no clean exit and no way to explain why it was still wrong. "She's going to finish this herself," he said. "Yes," Huey said. "And we're standing here. We're standing here for what comes after. If there is an after." Butcher looked at the bagged cameras, the PR handler pacing the tape going up around a loading dock at 1 in the morning, because a company was trying to contain something it couldn't name out loud. He looked at all of it. "Fine," he said. He didn't mean it in any of the ways the word usually meant. The Vought Logistics Coordination Center in Jersey City, not the tower, a secondary hub that handled programs absent from tower documentation, received the Inventory Authority failure alert at 12:41. The overnight duty officer ran the diagnostic twice, got identical results, and escalated. The Eden Oversight Director pulled the sync relay status, 17-minute offset. He pulled the inventory mirror status, 432 unverifiable records. He pulled the distribution pipeline, 11 active shipments flagged as authentication failed, sitting in transit unable to move in either direction, generating automated distress signals to a logistics coordinator who would have no framework for any of this in the morning. He called Edgar. Edgar listened to the full summary without interrupting. When the director finished, Edgar said, "The seed. Still at the Bayonne hub. Refrigeration is intact. Physical samples are not for long." A pause that felt like arithmetic. "She has the topology. She knows where the seed is. She didn't take it tonight because she was cutting the infrastructure first. She'll come back for the physical samples when there's nothing left to rebuild from." Silence on the line. "Activate the backup site," Edgar said. "Move the seed tonight, before the morning shift. Use the manual route, no digital record, no system trail. Physical manifest only couriers who don't know what they're carrying. If there's no chain of custody record, we can't verify. I know what we can't verify. Move it." He set the phone down and stood in his office in the dark city noise running 47 floors below, the kind of white noise that usually helped him think and wasn't helping now. He had spent 20 years building systems that survived disruption by being redundant, layered, self-correcting. She had spent 2 weeks reading those systems and was cutting them. At the points redundancy couldn't protect the validation logic, the sync, the trust. A system placed in its own records. She hadn't taken anything irreplaceable. She'd made the replaceable things unreliable, which was worse. He understood now what she'd been doing since the first night at Site Keller. Not stealing, not destroying, disabling the ability to recover. He called the backup site coordinator. "When she arrives," Edgar said, "and she will I want confirmation as soon as she's inside the perimeter. Not after the fact. The instant." The call ended. The window held the city. 3 miles south in the drainage corridor beneath the Bayonne complex, Pod 042 logged a new ping from the contingency tag it had placed on the hub's emergency backup relay during the strike. The ping carried a data packet destination coordinates routed through a physical manifest system that ran entirely offline, no connection to the Eden network, no coverage in the spine topology. A route that didn't exist in 2B's map. Pod 042. Cross-referenced the destination against every known Vought infrastructure node in its accumulated dataset. The match resolved in 40 seconds. Pod 042 logged off-network transfer initiated. Physical manifest only. Final destination identified. The backup site was a cold storage unit inside a self-storage facility in Elizabeth, New Jersey. The kind of place that existed in the peripheral vision of every city, generating no attention and no narrative. Unit 7C had been leased 18 months prior under a name that resolved after 4 shell layers to nothing. It had its own power circuit, its own ventilation, and a reinforced door that the facility's management company had installed without asking questions, because the tenant had paid for the upgrade in cash. Edgar had chosen it because it was not on any network. No barcode system, no digital inventory, no connection to anything. Vought ran electronically. The Seed 6 sealed canisters, the last fully authenticated Eden samples in existence now that the Bayonne hub's authority chain had been corrupted, had arrived at 3:40 in the morning in an unmarked refrigerated van carried by 2 couriers who had been told they were transporting biological research samples for a university study. The couriers had left. The site coordinator had stayed. She had been there 4 hours when Pod 042 found the location. The cross-reference had taken 40 seconds in the drainage corridor. It took another 6 hours to confirm because Pod 042 ran 3 independent verification passes against the physical manifest data before flagging a destination as definitive. 2B did not move on unconfirmed targets. She had learned in contexts that no longer existed to remember what happened when you did. By the time she was at the Elizabeth facility's perimeter, it was 9:40 in the morning. The self-storage complex ran its mundane operations around her, a man loading furniture into a unit on the east row. A woman in a sedan waiting for someone who was taking too long, a staff member, doing a slow circuit of the grounds on a golf cart. Normal, deliberate. The kind of environment where anything that didn't move like a storage customer would be noticed. She moved like a storage customer. Pod 042 had the facility's internal layout from its public filing standard grid, numbered rows, numbered units. Unit 7C was at the end of the 7th row, which was also the row closest to the facility's rear perimeter wall. She walked the grid in the pattern of someone who had forgotten which unit was theirs, which was a pattern indistinguishable from someone who was mapping the grid, which was what she was doing. One person inside 7C. Thermal signature seated facing the door. Alert. She passed the unit without stopping and took the position 2 units down between a concrete pillar and a storage door that hadn't been opened in months. Pod 042 confirmed no external surveillance coverage on the 7th row. The facility's cameras were concentrated at the entry gate and the office building. She went to the door. The site coordinator heard nothing until the lock disengaged, not forced, not cut, just opened with the specific quality of something that understood locks, at a level that bypassed the question of whether it was authorized. She was on her feet with the phone in her hand before the door finished moving. 2B stepped inside. She took in the coordinator. She took in the 6 canisters in the refrigeration unit against the far wall. Then she looked back at the coordinator. "Step outside," she said. The coordinator's thumb was on the emergency contact. One press she'd practiced had been told to practice it. "I'm calling. You can call after." 2B's voice had the register of someone stating a sequence of events, not making a threat. "Step outside, then call." The coordinator stepped outside. She pressed the contact. She stood in the 9th row in the morning light, listening to the phone ring, and tried to describe what she was looking at, which was a self-storage unit, with its door open and no one visible inside, and no sound coming from within to a person on the other end of the line who was asking her to slow down and start from the beginning. Inside, 2B worked. The 6 samples were sealed, authenticated, and intact. She documented each one. Pod 042, capturing full spectral data sample identifiers, authentication codes. Then she pulled the refrigeration unit's internal power coupling and replaced it with a portable thermal regulator running at 4 degrees above the preservation threshold. Not immediately destructive, progressive. The canisters would remain viable for approximately 90 minutes, after which the temperature differential would compromise the cellular structure irreversibly. She left the regulator in place and walked out of the unit. The coordinator was still on the phone, still in the 9th row. 2B passed her without stopping. The coordinator turned phone still at her ear and watched her walk the length of the 7th row and through the gap in the rear perimeter wall, a section of chain link that had been cut and reset from the outside at some point before 9:40 that morning. The coordinator said into the phone, "She's gone. She left." And the person on the other end told her to stay where she was and not touch anything. She stayed where she was. She did not touch anything. She looked at the open door of Unit 7C and the soft hum of something running inside it, and did not know what any of it meant, and that ignorance was the only protection she had ever been offered. Homelander arrived at the Elizabeth facility at 10:17. He had been at Vought Tower when Edgar's coordinator called, had been in the building, in fact, in a conversation with a legal team about the parameters of what he could and couldn't say publicly about ongoing security operations, which was the phrase they'd agreed on as a container for everything that had happened in the past 3 weeks. He had left that conversation mid-sentence when the call came through because the call said she's there, and that was the only information that mattered. He came in from above, which was always his preferred entry, and which announced him to everyone within 3 blocks. The storage facility's staff scattered. The woman in the sedan drove into the gate arm, trying to leave. The man with the furniture sat down on a dresser and did not move. Homelander landed in the central aisle and walked to the 7th row. He found the open unit, the running regulator, the 6 canisters, and the site coordinator, who was sitting on the ground in the 9th row and had nothing useful to tell him. "How long ago?" he said. "Maybe 10 minutes, 15. He studied the regulator, the canisters. A reading of the temperature output told him what the regulator was doing, even before he'd consciously processed it. He stayed with that for a beat longer. Not a long beat, but long enough that the coordinator noticed. Noticed the thing that passed across his face in that window, and decided not to describe it to anyone later because she didn't have language for it. That didn't sound wrong. He could move the canisters. He could pull the regulator, get them to a Vought facility with the right equipment, try to salvage whatever the temperature differential hadn't reached yet. He had, according to the regulator's output, approximately 70 minutes to do that. He thought about what facility he would take them to the Bayonne hub, which was dark. The Trenton research wing compromised. The Port Newark relay gutted. The site Keller network mapped and flagged and used as a blueprint against itself for 3 weeks. He stood in the 7th row and understood, with the specific clarity of someone who had just run out of moves, that there was no Vought facility he could name that hadn't been walked through. Read and left structurally intact, but functionally unable to do what he needed it to do right now. He left the canisters where they were. He flew back to Vought Tower. He said nothing on the way. The PR handler, who had been scrambled to meet him at the tower entrance, took one look at his face and decided that the statement she'd drafted could wait. The Eden Oversight Director called Edgar at 11. "It's over," the director said. He said it the way people said things they'd rehearsed because they'd known they were going to have to say them eventually. "Yes," Edgar said. "The samples or the regulator ran its cycle. There's nothing left to authenticate." "I know." A pause. "What do we tell the board?" Edgar considered that. He looked at the city outside his window, high enough that the street below had no texture, the same indifferent sprawl it always was, with no opinion about what happened in refrigerated storage units in Elizabeth, New Jersey. "We tell them the trial encountered insurmountable obstacles in the preservation chain. We tell them the scientific basis remains sound and future development will require a new framework. We tell them Q1 projections are being revised. And the everything else. Files are being reviewed by legal. Those conversations happen internally." He paused. "There's no external record that connects any of this to anything we can't manage." The director said nothing. "That's all," Edgar said, and ended the call. At his desk, the calendar was open to the notation from 3 weeks ago, pen on paper, the entry that had started all of this trial viable. Proceeding. The next page was blank. What she had taken in the end, a relay drive, a camera card, a chain of custody index, a corrupted validation chain, a timing module, and 90 minutes of temperature differential. Nothing that appeared in any individual transaction to constitute an act of war. Nothing that would hold up in a courtroom as evidence of anything other than a sequence of facility breaches. Nothing that could be attributed officially to anyone. And Eden, which had cost $400 million across 11 years, was gone. He turned the calendar page back, picked up his pen, and drew a clean horizontal line through the notation. Huey found out the way. He found out most things a text from a number that had never identified itself, containing 4 words and a period. Objective complete. Mission over. He sat with it for a while. He was in the safe house, which smelled like coffee that had been sitting too long, and the particular staleness of a space where people had been tense for 3 weeks straight. Frenchie was asleep on the couch. Kimiko was at the window. Starlight was reading something on her phone with the expression of someone pretending to read. Butcher was outside. He'd been outside for an hour. Huey showed the text to Starlight. She read it. Her eyes came up to his, then dropped back to her own screen. "Did she say anything else?" Starlight asked. "No." "Did you reply?" He thought about that. He thought about the warehouse in Greenpoint, and not my mission and the node data that had arrived without explanation because it was useful, and usefulness was apparently its own justification. He thought about Subject 37's file coordinates, flagged under human subject non-hostile intent. Contained a detail the Bayonne strike report had included, and that no one except him seemed to have noticed. "No," he said. "Then, I don't think she checks." Frenchie shifted on the couch without waking. The coffee machine ticked as it cooled. Starlight was quiet briefly. "Do you think she's okay?" Huey looked at the text. 4 words and a period from a number that would probably stop existing in the next hour. He sat with what okay meant as a question about something like 2B, whether the question even had the right shape, and whether it mattered that he couldn't answer it. I think she's moving, he said. The noise from the street came through the safe house walls, the way it always did. Indifferent, continuous belonging to no one. Somewhere in it, or past it, or already gone from it entirely, 1042 was logging the mission closure, and 2B was calculating the next sequence. Not this sequence, not Eden, but whatever came after, in whatever direction the data pointed, in whatever city had the misfortune of containing the next thing that needed to be contained. Butcher came back inside. He looked at Huey. Huey held up the phone. Butcher read the 4 words. He stood there with an expression that could have been relief. If relief was something he was currently capable of, and which was probably something else entirely. Right, he said. He sat down. He didn't say anything else. Outside, the city kept moving. It always did.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and be sure to turn on notifications so you won't miss our future videos. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.